Studio Ghibli, the modern standard for gorgeous and fanciful animation. The studio behind celebrated films like Spirited Away, My Neighbor Totoro, and Howl's Moving Castle. Praised worldwide for its strong sense of imagination and devotion to quality releases. Not only are Studio Ghibli's movies quality, they're unique. Something feels different about watching a Disney film, or a DreamWorks film, or a Leica film, versus a Studio Ghibli film. But what are the differences? What features of Studio Ghibli films have created a brand? My argument is that it comes down to three core aspects that compose nearly every movie: imagery, storytelling, and music. Studio Ghibli, over the course of 20 feature films since 1986, has managed to create a distinct set of expectations in these three categories that its viewers can have of nearly every movie they produce. Specifically, the works of animator and director Hayao Miyazaki, such as Spirited Away or Castle in the Sky, have a certain homogeneity to them. Seeing as Miyazaki has written and/or directed over half of Studio Ghibli's feature films, and considering that 5 of his films are among the top 10 highest-grossing anime movies, Miyazaki's work will be our main focus. Let's start with imagery. Many of Studio Ghibli's most celebrated films place a very heavy emphasis on scenery. Animators set out to create massive, fleshed-out worlds surrounding their characters, conveyed in these wide, beautiful shots. Many of them strive to be natural, like those in My Neighbor Totoro or Princess Mononoke. These movies are complemented by their brilliant natural scenery because they include themes of the wonders of nature or environmental preservation. In other films, the scenery turns rather fantastic, such as in Spirited Away or Castle in the Sky. Some of the most powerful emotional moments come from the viewer's first breathtaking glimpses of these massive and imaginative centerpieces. For a few wonderful moments, the characters take a back seat to the scene. In a form of entertainment that is character-driven, these moments in Studio Ghibli remind us that scenes themselves can be more than just backdrops. They can be spectacles. The characters, by comparison, are often drawn to be elegant but simple. With a studio devoted to hand-drawn animation, the subjects in motion must be lightly detailed but also unique. Characters are often beautifully cel-shaded, defined by 1 or 2 prominently displayed clothing colors, perhaps with smaller highlights. Simple can be relatable and charming. More ornate or heavily detailed computer-animated characters can certainly be compelling as well, but Studio Ghibli often saves elaboration for the static scenery. Moreover, human Ghibli characters have a distinct anatomy. They have rather simple heads with a soft indent between forehead and jaw. The hair is sometimes sharply drawn, but through animation becomes soft and windblown. Many features such as the nose, mouth, eyebrows, and ear canals are simple lines, but become expressive of these features through shape, thickness, and placement. Mastery of this style allows Ghibli to create new characters that remain recognizably of the same brand as their previous films. Through details such as clothing, color, and slight facial variation, new characters end up looking both fresh and traditional, taken from the same stock as past creations, but different enough to allow viewers to distinguish them as new, blank slates. Which brings me to a final point on imagery: detail. While certain visual aspects like individual characters or objects may sometimes be simple, I would argue that nearly every shot, every backdrop, is packed with detail, making for a very rich viewing experience. In the same way that live-action filmmakers such as Wes Anderson are very conscious of the objects and props that compose each shot, Studio Ghibli seems hyper-aware as an animation studio that atmosphere is often in the details. Untidy rooms, forgotten and dusty artifacts, imperfections, crumbling ancient architecture and overgrown landscapes, items and tools and knickknacks that will never be used or approached, but only seen by the audience. In some cases, it borders on visual overload. While some may find it would suffice to simply include some magical trinkets or tomes in Howl's Moving Castle, there are scenes where these mysterious and complex treasures are piled high all around him. The acute details actually become the scene's backdrop. This complements Hal by using imagery to raise questions. What are these tools or treasures for, and where do they come from? Hal is made all the more enigmatic and exciting simply by being shown in his own home among all of his possessions. This is one example of how detail comes into play in Studio Ghibli films, and how Ghibli animators always work to keep imagery as one of the highest priorities in the filmmaking process. Moving next to storytelling. Maybe you'll agree that these films are often written like no other animated movies tend to be. I first watched Spirited Away when I was 7 years old, and while I was unable to articulate it then, I was struck by the plot of what seemed to me a kid's movie. It was mostly kid-friendly, but the suitability seemed almost coincidental. Characters bled and were placed in real danger. So which was it? Studio Ghibli seems unconcerned with age ratings, and far more devoted to crafting deeply imaginative tales. As a result, the plots of their films often seem to me to transcend the idea of animated storytelling being geared toward particular audiences. All it comes down to is whether or not you, as an audience member, choose to believe the tale as it is told. This is not true of all Ghibli films, but perhaps holds up when Ghibli is working at its best. Take, for example, Castle in the Sky. The movie is constructed around a legend it proposed toward the beginning, and while it has its comical moments and characters, it also has a taste for the epic, the ancient, and the evil. What ends up happening in many Studio Ghibli films is that the audience gets to see these categorically adult things, the impressive and the unknown, through the eyes of children. In what better way is there to encounter the fantastic? This is one of Studio Ghibli's great storytelling strengths, consistently delivering childlike wonder by deliberately following those who are youthful in body or in mind. This is the case for almost all of Ghibli's films, but the studio does more than simply exposing young characters to fantastic situations. It's evident that Studio Ghibli is also committed to grounding its characters, and by extension its audience, in some degree of realism. In terms of imagery, people often point to this scene from Spirited Away. Chihiro taps her feet into her shoes to get them snug before running off to meet Haku. In a scene from Ponyo, Sosuke looks very cautious, small and fragile, as he descends the rocks to the shore. These are visual touches that help humanize the characters, because they mirror our own world, even though animation does not have to mimic reality. But from a storytelling standpoint, we have broader patterns that help make the movies feel more real. Many Studio Ghibli films spend a good deal of time in urban and relatable settings, or small and quaint townships. There is a sense of innate routine here that the viewer infers. There's no visible magic in everyday labors or spending time at home, but by taking time to show these normal scenes in our characters' lives, the movies give the audience points of comparison to later scenes of excitement and wonder. It also gives our protagonists the best opportunities to become true heroes, because they are pulled from their often comfortable, modest lives and thrust into danger. Like the audience, they experience the unknown, but the actions and choices they make in the face of conflict showcase growth and heroism. To wrap up the subject of storytelling, some conversations about Studio Ghibli films evoke the topic of Western versus Eastern styles. I don't necessarily claim to know the difference between the two in a very intimate way, but I do understand that the traditions of the Western and Eastern hemispheres vary greatly, and I can only assume that storytelling practices differ as a result of such a long period of cultural separation. One thing I do notice is this: storytelling can be complex if necessary, but often remains somewhat simple, especially in the smaller details. Hal pulls the curse from the table and takes it into his hand. Chihiro has to keep asking Kamaji for a job until he says yes, or she will disappear.
Please, I've got to get a job here!
I don't need any help.
Ponyo has tasted Sosuke's blood, and that makes her different than the other goldfish.
What else did you do? Did you taste blood, Brunhilde?
My name is not Brunhilde, it's Ponyo.
None of this is ever really explained, and the audience never really knows why. Maybe under different direction, the writers would have made more of an effort to answer any questions they could anticipate arising from these plot points. But I think Studio Ghibli subscribes to the idea that refusing to explain why all the time is more engaging and more mysterious. When dealing with things like gods, magic, and spirits, maybe it's not always our business to know all of the answers. On to our last topic, music. I would venture to say that composer Joe Hisaishi is to Studio Ghibli as Koji Kondo is to Nintendo. Their music sticks with its listeners. It's often epic, touching, and effective. And interestingly, their music is often orchestral. Maybe orchestral music is more striking in a Zelda game than a movie, because film is a more advanced format, whereas video gaming has only been making great strides in the past couple of decades. But what does orchestral music offer? I would argue it gives a sense of scale to the visuals it's paired with. Dozens of instruments being played at once is impressive and moving. Audiences are often incapable of distinguishing individual instruments in the orchestra, being left instead with a powerful collective feeling. Also important is the fact that orchestral music is instrumental. There is no singing. This causes the music to interact more with the imagery and the film itself, rather than the audience. The lyrics of sing-along Disney songs serve to be an interactive experience for the audience. They give the viewers a chance to perform along with the characters in the film. And this is certainly a subjective point, but I often feel that an instrumental musical backdrop creates more compelling, emotional scenes than if it were to be represented in lyrical song form. And in a world where so many things are larger than life, the music remaining atmospheric gives more meaning to the voices of the characters and grounds the scene more in reality than in theatricality. Another point on music is that many Ghibli films have a main theme, or at least a handful of recurring melodies. Remember what I was saying about how each Ghibli character is uniquely drawn, but is still identifiable as a Ghibli character? That's sort of a visual brand for Studio Ghibli, because similar but not the same character designs help set each movie apart while still identifying them as part of the Ghibli library. Movie music themes are a form of audio branding. To elaborate, Studio Ghibli's audio brand is giving each movie a unique theme, but still usually using orchestral, instrumental scores and no interactive songs except perhaps during the credits. This also allows for variations on the musical themes of each movie. Take, for example, the theme of Castle in the Sky. Toward the beginning, we have a slow, sweet melody constructed in The Girl Who Fell from the Sky. Then, it's repeated playfully in The Levitation Crystal. It's played again solemnly during Confessions in the Moonlight, primarily by a single piano. Then, it's sung as an elegy by a choir as Laputa collapses in the destruction of Laputa.
To me. I'll say it with you. Just put your hand in mine and trust me.
Lastly, it's sung with lyrics during the credits theme. What this does is create a melody unique to the movie, while also tying important scenes together and giving the movie more auditory cohesion. The movie offers a familiar melody from time to time, but presents it differently to fit the tone. One last thing on the topic of music. Many Studio Ghibli films incorporate at least one song using only or primarily one kind of instrument, for a considerable amount of time. Typically, this is a piano, such as in Ashitaka and San. Or the Sixth Station. However, there are other examples that don't use a piano. The destruction of Laputa, as I said earlier, is sung by a choir, using voice as the only instrumentation for the song. The secret cave is led into by a solitary trumpet when Sophie gets a glimpse into Howl's childhood past. This often has a profound effect, as simplicity can ironically lend a special gravity to the moment, whether it be solemn or peaceful. In any case, I count it as a special recurring style choice, as it often tends to stick with me and make certain scenes from the movies all the more memorable. To conclude, I guess I would say that Studio Ghibli has crafted a formula that has led to continual critical success and celebration over the years. And it's a formula that inspires people like myself to review their films closely, admiring these patterns. There is something to be said for a studio that has remained thought-provoking and dedicated to its craft for more than 30 years. And I felt it was worth saluting this team for regularly producing films that captivate our imaginations. Thanks.